What if the one who was executed never truly died, and their spirit still stands right behind the executioner? In the ancient village of Darrowmere, there was one execution so terrifying that the entire kingdom forbade its mention for over 2 centuries. Subscribe now and step with me through the gate to that forgotten scaffold, where laughter still echoes in the rain. There are tales from the old kingdom of Eldermoor that even time refuses to bury. Among them, one speaks of a night when the law itself was judged, when justice bled black beneath the moon. They say if you walk through the ruins of Darrowmere village during a storm, you can still hear it, the faint echo of a woman's laughter, mingled with the slow creak of an ancient gallows. Some swear that if you listen too long, you'll feel a cold breath touch the back of your neck, as if someone is standing right behind you. Someone who never truly died. But what really happened on that night of cursed rain? Why did an entire court vanish, leaving behind only the scent of burnt parchment and rusted chains? The year was 1347, the age of plagues and iron laws. The kingdom of Eldermoor was drowning in superstition, and every shadow was blamed on witches. Over it all presided a single man, Lord Alaric, the oldest judge in the royal court, a man whose verdicts were said to echo like divine commands. At 63, Alaric had sentenced hundreds to death, yet his conscience weighed heavier than his robes. He believed justice had a soul, and that soul was slowly dying. In the mirror, he often caught his own eyes trembling, as though something unseen was watching from within. When the messenger brought news of another witch to be tried, a woman accused of hearing the voices of the dead, Alaric felt a strange chill run down his spine. Her name was Lyra. The report claimed she whispered to the graveyards that she could hear every soul that had been wrongly executed. For others, she was a monster. For Alaric, she was an echo from a past he wished to forget. The trial was to be held in Darrowmere, a place few dared to mention aloud. Even the crows avoided its skies. As Alaric rode through the forest toward the village, rain began to fall, thick, dark, almost oily. He looked up at the clouds and murmured to himself, "Perhaps the heavens weep before the law does." Little did he know, by sunrise, the law itself would be on trial, and he would be the one sentenced. They brought Lyra to the hall at dawn, wrists bound with twine rather than iron. The guards said chains fell loose from her, as if metal refused to touch her. She was neither young nor old, with a quiet, steady gaze that made listeners lower their eyes, without knowing why. Word had spread that she heard voices from beneath the soil, that cemeteries spoke to her like old friends. Alaric studied her from the bench. He expected theatric spells, pleas, curses. Instead, Lyra simply lifted her head and met his gaze with a softness that unsettled him more than any scream could. "Do you hear the dead?" he asked, voice formal, almost brittle. "Yes," she said gently, "but only when the living lie." A murmur rippled through the hall. Alaric felt an old ache stir behind his ribs, a memory he kept locked away. He pressed on. "The accusation claims you provoked fever and dread. I answered questions no one wished to ask," Lyra replied. "Illness arrived long before my footsteps. I am blamed for echoes." Her answers were neither defiant nor broken. They were precise, like stones laid one by one across a river. Each word made a path, and Alaric feared where that path might lead. He dismissed the crowd and ordered the verdict to be read at sunrise. Guilty by superstition, a phrase the court used when evidence was smoke, but panic was fire. That night, the village braced for the execution. Doors were shuttered, candles were snuffed with trembling fingers. Darrowmere had seen many dawns, but not one like this. In the judge's chamber, the air tasted of soot and rain. Alaric tried to sleep, but the hours refused him. At the 13th chime, though no bell hung in Darrowmere, someone knocked on his door. 13 deliberate raps, each more patient than the last. Alaric opened to an empty corridor. Only a draught wandered in, damp and cold, carrying a scrap of paper that fluttered to his feet. The note was half-soaked, the ink swimming like minnows. Yet one line stood clear. If you judge wrongly, the law will borrow your face." He fed the note to the hearth. The flames rose, then faltered, paling to a strange, lightless hue. Smoke slid along the stones and crept toward his boots like a cautious animal. Alaric shut the grate and turned away, heart knocking steadily at his ribs, as though it too wanted out. Sleep came in fragments. In one shard of dream, Lyra stood beneath the scaffold, hair wet with night, speaking to the ground. In another, the gallows rope swung with no wind, stretching long as a shadow at noon. When the dark finally thinned, Alaric rose with the certainty of a man approaching a cliff. The sentence would be carried out, and something would answer it. Outside, dawn bled through low clouds. The scaffold loomed over the square like a raised finger, warning the sky. The villagers gathered in a hush, broken only by the soft tap of rain. Lyra walked willingly, barefooted, leaving clean prints on the wet boards. She looked once at Alaric, no anger, no plea, only a question he could not bear to hear. "Do you remember?" she asked. Alaric flinched. Remember what? Above them, the rope trembled, as if it too could hear. Morning came shrouded in ash-colored mist. The gallows waited in the square, its rope slick with dew. Not a bird stirred. Even the crows had vanished from the trees. Only the whisper of rain against wood filled the silence, a slow heartbeat of the village itself. Lord Alaric stepped onto the scaffold with the heavy dignity of ritual. His robe was soaked to the knees, his hands trembling under the parchment of the final decree. The words blurred as he tried to read them, and he realized, though no wind stirred, the page itself was moving, as if something unseen were breathing through the ink. "Lyra of Darrowmere," he began. "You are sentenced." She lifted her face, the rain sliding down her cheeks like tears not her own. "Sentenced by whom, my lord?" Her tone was calm, but the air changed with each syllable, cold enough to make breath visible. Alaric hesitated. The crowd shifted restlessly, seeking reassurance from his authority, but the power he once carried like armor now felt hollow, clattering around him like loose bones. "You have been found guilty," he said again. "By the will of the living?" Lyra interrupted. "Then let the dead decide." Her eyes were not defiant, only terribly knowing. For the first time, Alaric saw her not as a witch, but as someone staring past him at something standing just behind his shoulder. The executioner, masked and mute, reached for the lever. The rope creaked. The moment stretched thin, and in that fragile space between breath and silence, Alaric heard a sound he could not name, a low humming, like dozens of voices buried beneath the earth, murmuring in unison. Then the lever dropped. The rope snapped tight, yet there was no gasp, no cry, only a strange, hollow vibration that passed through the boards and into Alaric's feet. He looked down. The rain had stopped. The mud beneath the scaffold shimmered, as though absorbing light. From the point where Lyra's shadow should have fallen, black smoke began to rise, not drifting upward, but twisting inward, sinking into the ground like breath drawn in reverse. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Mothers clutched their children. Someone screamed, "The rope! Look at the rope!" The noose, instead of fraying, pulsed gently as if alive. The hemp darkened, veins of crimson threading along its length before fading into black. Alaric's heart hammered. His lips moved soundlessly. He stepped closer, expecting to see her lifeless body. But Lyra's head was bowed, her body still hanging, yet her eyes were open, and she was smiling. Before anyone could speak, the gallows cracked with a thunderous groan. The wooden beams split, sending splinters flying. Lyra's body fell to the ground, but when Alaric rushed forward, there was no body at all. Only a ring of scorched earth remained, still smoking, shaped like a circle drawn by trembling hands. He sank to his knees, the parchment slipping from his fingers. The ink bled into the dirt, the letters warping into a single phrase, one that no one in Darrowmere could read, yet all felt burning in their bones. Justice has been sold. 3 nights passed before anyone dared return to the scaffold. The rain had ceased, but the air still tasted of metal and ash. The villagers whispered that the ground had turned sour. No grass grew near the circle of blackened soil where Lyra had fallen. Then the first body was found. A sentry, posted to guard the square, was discovered standing upright beside the gallows, his eyes wide open, his skin grey as candle wax. His lips were parted as though caught mid-sentence, but no sound came out. A thin line of soot ran from his mouth to his chest, a perfect straight mark that pulsed faintly when touched. By dawn, a second guard was dead. By dusk, the church bell began ringing on its own. It tolled 13 times before stopping, and with each peal, the villagers swore they heard a woman's voice whispering beneath it. Lord Alaric had not slept since the execution. The parchment of Lyra's sentence still lay on his desk, warped and blistered by heat that no fire had made. He tried to burn it, but the parchment would not catch. Instead, it bled a faint, dark liquid that soaked into the wood grain and vanished. At night, he walked the corridors of the courthouse, lantern trembling in his grip. He could hear faint tapping, slow and deliberate, coming from the walls. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more. It followed him from room to room. Once, he caught his reflection in a window and saw not his own eyes staring back, but hers, dark, steady, and filled with quiet pity. He turned away, whispering a prayer that sounded like an apology. On the 4th night, he heard footsteps on the stairwell, bare feet, wet against stone. He followed the sound to the chamber where Lyra had been held before the trial. The door was ajar, though he remembered locking it. Inside, the chains lay on the floor, their iron rings twisted like vines. The lantern's flame flickered, and in that brief pulse of light, Alaric saw her. Lyra stood in the corner, motionless. Her hair dripped with unseen rain, her dress burned black at the hem. She looked exactly as she had before the sentence, except her shadow stretched the wrong way toward the ceiling. "Why have you returned?" Alaric whispered. She tilted her head, almost kindly. "I never left." Her voice carried no malice, only a weary sadness that settled deep into the marrow of his bones. Alaric backed toward the door, but the hinges would not move. The air thickened, his lungs seized. Behind her, the walls began to darken, shapes emerging from the stone, faint silhouettes of faces pressed outward, as if the wall itself were remembering the dead. "Do you see them now?" Lyra asked softly. "The ones who called for justice but found your silence instead." Her hand rose not to strike, but to point. At him. The faces in the wall turned their eyeless gazes toward Alaric. A single, low whisper rippled through the room, 1,000 voices speaking one word: "Judge." He stumbled into the corridor, heart shuddering like a broken drum. Behind him, the door closed on its own, with a slow, patient click. The lantern guttered out, and in the darkness that followed, Alaric thought he heard Lyra's final whisper: "You cannot judge the dead, Alaric, but they can judge you." When dawn came, Lord Alaric left Darrowmere without a word. He rode alone beneath a sky the color of bruised iron, toward the monastery of Greyhaven, a fortress of stone and silence said to house records of every judgment ever written. His horse stumbled twice on the road, though there were no stones to trip upon. Once, he thought he heard the sound of footsteps behind him, keeping pace, though he rode through empty fields. Inside the monastery, the monks said little. They watched him with the wary eyes of men who had seen too much. The abbot, a stooped figure wrapped in pale robes, led him down a spiral stair to the archives. Dust filled the air like smoke, and the shelves rose endlessly, stuffed with parchments bound in twine, the stories of the damned. "I seek a record," Alaric said, voice dry. "A woman named Lyra of Darrowmere, tried for witchcraft 20 years ago." The abbot's lantern flickered. "We have no record of such a trial, my lord, but there is a sealed file, one your own hand forbade to open." He held out a cracked ledger. The wax seal was stamped with Alaric's insignia, his own crest, faded but unmistakable. Alaric's fingers trembled as he broke it. Inside, the ink was faded brown, but the handwriting was his. He read the charge. Lyra, clerk of the court, accused of perjury and heresy. The witnesses, 5 noblemen, names he recognized all too well. The verdict, guilty. The sentence, execution by drowning. But there was no record of the execution itself, only a note at the bottom, written in a different hand. The accused was never found. The river returned nothing. The memory broke through him like a blade. He remembered the trial, the bribes pressed into his palm, the promise of silence if he condemned her. Lyra had begged not for mercy, but for truth. He had silenced her with a signature. Alaric sank to his knees. "Gods forgive me," he whispered. "I killed an innocent woman." The abbot's shadow shifted across the floor. "The gods are deaf in Eldermoor, my lord," he said softly, "but the dead are not." A sound stirred among the shelves, pages rustling, though no wind blew. The parchments shivered, letters sliding across them like insects fleeing light. Then, one by one, the volumes began to fall, spines cracking open, their pages turning of their own accord. The abbot stepped back, crossing himself. "She knows you remember," he breathed, "and now she will finish what you began." Alaric looked down at the ledger. His handwriting had changed before his eyes, forming new words in fresh, wet ink. The trial was not hers. It was mine. The candlelight dimmed. In the darkness between shelves, a woman's shape appeared, her face half hidden, her eyes glinting like mirrors in the dark. "Truth," she whispered, her voice both near and far, "was never yours to give." The flame died, and the archives fell silent except for the faint, rhythmic sound of dripping water, though the ceiling was dry. That night, Alaric fled the monastery. He rode through forests shrouded in fog, unable to tell dream from waking. The stars seemed to vanish one by one, devoured by the same darkness that now gnawed at his mind. When his horse finally collapsed from exhaustion, he continued on foot, drawn toward the sound of water. He followed it to the river of Darrowmere, where the gallows stood reflected in the black current like a memory unwilling to drown. The scaffold was whole again, though it had been destroyed. Beneath it, the earth still bore the circle of scorched soil, pulsing faintly with red light, like a wound refusing to close. He knew she would be waiting. Alaric stepped onto the boards. The air thickened around him, tasting of smoke and rain. The rope swayed slowly, though there was no wind. From the darkness, a woman's voice rose soft, mournful, yet threaded with terrible calm. "You came back." Lyra appeared at the edge of the scaffold, her form neither living nor dead. Her eyes glowed faintly, reflecting every candle ever lit in vain prayers. "I remember everything," Alaric whispered. "I condemned you, for gold, for silence, for fear." Lyra studied him, her expression unreadable. "And now, I seek judgment." She tilted her head. "Do you think death can balance what you weighed wrongly?" "I think death is the only law left to me," he said. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she raised her hand, and the sky above them seemed to open. The clouds swirled into a spiral of grey light, revealing faces hundreds, maybe thousands souls Alaric had condemned through the years. Men, women, children, their features blurred by time, but their eyes clear and sharp as glass. "Do you know them?" Lyra asked quietly. "They waited for your justice. You gave them your pride." The faces moved closer, forming a circle around the scaffold. Their whispers filled the air, overlapping like waves. "Judge, judge yourself." Alaric trembled, tears streaming down his cheeks. He unfastened the clasp of his robe and placed it on the ground. The symbols of his rank clattered into the dirt. "I have lived behind the word law all my life," he said. "But it was fear, not law, that guided me." He took the noose into his hands. The rope was cold, slick like wet stone. He looped it around his neck and looked toward Lyra one final time. "Let it end." But Lyra stepped forward and placed a hand on his chest. "No," she murmured. "It will not end. It will return." The boards beneath them shuddered. The river surged upward, black water swallowing the scaffold. Alaric's feet left the ground, yet there was no pain, only light. The faces dissolved into mist, merging with the storm. Lyra's hand lingered against his heart until both figures faded into the rain. When the villagers found the scaffold days later, they discovered 2 sets of footprints leading to it and none leaving. Only a torn parchment remained nailed to the beam, written in Alaric's hand. Justice is not a crown, it is a mirror, and it never breaks. The ink was still wet. The years that followed blurred into folklore. Darrowmere was abandoned, its fields turned to marsh, and its wells to mirrors of still, black water. No one ploughed, no one prayed. Travelers spoke of strange lights flickering over the gallows on moonless nights, as if candles were being lit for trials long forgotten. The locals who remained swore the scaffold rebuilt itself every autumn. They claimed that the sound of a gavel striking echoed from the empty square, followed by a woman's quiet laughter carried on the wind. Those who tried to cut down the rope found it whole again by morning, its fibers damp as though freshly used. In the archives of Eldermoor, Alaric's name was erased. His title, his estate, his family crest, all struck through with red wax. Only one line remained, written in the margin by an unknown scribe. The judge became the judged, and justice learned to breathe. Centuries passed, yet the curse endured. Soldiers who camped near Darrowmere vanished before dawn, leaving only wet footprints leading toward the gallows. Monks who came to sanctify the place fled after hearing voices reciting verdicts in the dead tongue of the Old Kingdom. By the time Eldermoor crumbled into history, Darrowmere existed only in rumor, a stain on ancient maps, a whisper in courtrooms when judgment felt too swift. But the legend lived on, passed from one frightened mouth to another. They say that on stormy nights, when rain falls thick and black as ink, the air tastes of iron and smoke. If you walk the road to the river, you might see a faint red glow through the mist. And if you are foolish enough to follow it, you'll find the scaffold waiting untouched by time, its rope swaying, though the wind has died. At its center, 2 shadows stand side by side. One holds a gavel, the other a noose. Sometimes they speak. Their words are not cruel, only cold and precise. The law remembers, then the light fades, and the rain begins again. No one knows where Lord Alaric or Lyra rest, if rest is what you could call it. Some say their souls became the keepers of justice for the dead, weighing every lie whispered in the name of truth. Others claim they were never human to begin with, only reflections of the same spirit, one to judge, one to remind. And so the tale of Darrowmere endures, not as a warning, but as a question whispered in the heart of every courtroom, every confession, every sleepless night. When the law forgets mercy, who judges the law itself? No answer ever comes, only the echo of a hammer striking wood. Thud, thud, thud. The trial never ends.